Welcome to Sons of Resistance channel. The Ukraine-Russia war turned into a long-term process that exhausted both sides. The suffocating attacks of the Ukrainian heroes further devastated the already weary Russian army. Zelensky's heroic soldiers, especially at the present time, virtually ousted Russian troops from the Ukrainian lands they occupied. Thanks to the liberation operation organized by the Ukrainian armed forces, the heroes of Ukraine began to gradually push the Russian forces towards the border of the country. As a result of all these Ukrainian pressures, the Russian army, which entered a period of collapse, no longer had the strength to fight. Russian leader Vladimir Putin had to declare mobilization across Russia to put a stop to this trend. Because the Russian army had lost more than 60,000 soldiers since February 24, it also lost nearly 15 military vehicles, including more than 2,000 tanks. Although the Kremlin administration and Vladimir Putin tried to hide these losses, the numbers reached very serious levels. It was thought that 300,000 volunteer Russian citizens expected to be recruited into the Russian army with the mobilization decision announced by the Russian leader would fill the losses. In addition, the fact that the Russian Federation had to buy ammunition and armed drones from Iran and North Korea was proof that the Russian army was running out of ammunition. In addition, Russian President Vladimir Putin has been knocking on the door of President of the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping, for 6 months. Although the main reason for this is for the supply of spare parts due to economic sanctions, it has also recently applied to China for the supply of military ammunition. However, China unequivocally rejected Russia's demands and condemns Russia's annexation actions in Ukraine. Putin had to return empty-handed from Xi's door. Still, the Chinese administration has never described Russia's operation in Ukraine as a war and diplomatically supports the Russian Federation. By the way, we should mention that Iran and North Korea are on the blacklist of the USA and many other countries. The mobilization plan, which Vladimir Putin attempted, also proceeded unsuccessfully, and most of the Russian citizens started to leave the country by packing their luggage right after the announced mobilization decision. Desperate, the Russian leader continued to search for fresh blood. This time Vladimir Putin, who tried his luck into the minority republics of the Russian Federation, faced huge protests against mobilization in Dagestan. No country, no republic, no world state wanted to fight for Russia, nor to provide military resources to Russia. The Russian leader, who isolated himself from the world politics and diplomatic arena, thought that this time the solution was to impose sanctions on Europe. Using the most valuable thing he had as leverage, Vladimir Putin threatened all of Europe with Russian natural gas, and even applied many energy sanctions to Germany and France. But Vladimir Putin did not succeed in this plan either. The Russian leader needed financial resources for the Ukraine war, and Russian natural gas could not be a blackmail tool that he could use on the battlefield. Therefore, the Russian leader made improvements in the energy sanctions he imposed on Germany. Now, with nowhere to run, the Russian administration had to sever some shocking facts. Yes, the sentences that made everyone move were uttered by the Russian administration. The Russian army has run out of ammo. Since February 24, the Russians, who recklessly used weapons and other military equipment to attack Ukraine, have run out of bullets. Russian troops currently in Ukraine have many weapons from old Soviet era. If you say the tanks used by the Russians in the war, they are also from the Soviet era. Because of this situation, the Russian soldiers had a serious collapse in terms of morale. Many soldiers and senior officers in the Russian army have no hope left for the Ukrainian war, and even the vast majority of Russian soldiers no longer want to fight in Ukraine. Especially in the 3-month period of the war, a significant increase was observed in the number of soldiers fleeing the Russian troops and taking refuge in the Ukrainian armed forces. Russian soldiers who want to save their lives either flee from the war fronts or surrender to the Ukrainian armed forces and live under the guarantee of the Geneva Convention provisions. In fact, ammunition shortages greatly affected both sides of the war. But Russia suffered much more from this situation. Ukraine, on the other hand, was able to survive for a long time thanks to the help of Western states and USA. In particular, the HIMARS missile systems supplied by the Ukrainian armed forces from the US government caused the Russians to collapse in terms of both the army and morale. HIMARS, which turned into a weapon of hell in the hands of a heroic Ukrainian army, had a great influence in changing the course of the war. Thanks to the HIMARS missile systems, many Russian ammunition were destroyed. Russian air bases, tanks, warplanes were also shattered by HIMARS. Well, why doesn't the US administration, which has such an effective weapon, provide much more to Ukraine? Doesn't the US government have much more powerful missile systems and other military equipment? Or does he not want to send it? Not both when we think about it and regulate it. No matter how much it supports Ukraine and announces that it will continue to support Ukraine, the US government has to act decisively. Threats posed by Russia include the use of nuclear weapons. For this reason, the US administration does not in any way risk both Ukraine and any country that would be harmed by the possibility of this attack. Russian leader Vladimir Putin, on the other hand, is forced to approach China in order to withstand the aid and financial packages coming to the Ukrainian army. The Russian leader, who knocked on the door of China, also leaves here empty-handed. The Chinese government has recently given Russia no hope other than political and diplomatic support. The attitude of China towards the Russian administration was enough to surprise the whole world. Because from the beginning of the war, the Chinese administration was talking about supporting Russia and that the aid to Russia could be unlimited. But the balances have changed. It seems that the Chinese government has saved the aid it mentioned for another spring. When the Russian leader could not find what he expected from China, he had to try to persuade other allies. The Moscow administration and the Russian army were in need of even one cannonball. The Russian administration sometimes bought artillery shells from North Korea, sometimes it had to turn Iran. The Minister of Defense of Ukraine claimed to have shot down an Iranian drone used by Russian forces near Kupiansk. The Department of Strategic Communications of the Armed Forces of Ukraine has released photos showing a destroyed drone that resembles the wing of Iran's shaded 136 drone. Yesterday, Ukraine's Minister of Defense said it is possible for Russian forces to use Iranian-made drones, and Ukraine's Minister of Defense said that Russia is almost certainly procuring more and more weapons from other heavily sanctioned states, such as Iran and North Korea, as its own stockpiles dwindle. Russian leader Vladimir Putin eventually came to this level because of the irregular soldiers in the Russian army. The Russian leader had to withdraw from many important regions. The Russians, who had to leave important settlements such as Kherson, Limnia and Donetsk, are currently going through very difficult times. It is said that much worse days are waiting for Russia because the Russian soldiers are far from discipline and their fate in the war is exhausted. With Ukrainian heroes capturing important regions such as Donetsk, Kherson and Kharkiv, Ukraine's efforts to eliminate Russia from the war seem to be working quite well at the moment. Russian leader Vladimir Putin's army currently has two options, just like the two major possibilities that Ukrainian forces have. First, either the Russian armed forces will be forced into the negotiation process as their war ammunition will be exhausted. The second possibility is that the Russian administration will prolong the duration of the war by procuring military equipment and other resources from Iran and North Korea. But both options are currently working for the Ukrainian government and its precious army. Because against Russia, which is training old weapons, there is now a very powerful and modern Ukraine. We will discover together what can happen in the future. Stay cool for now. Don't forget to open the bell and follow our channel.